Leadership has always been an admired and valued trait, especially in the military, where the decisions of commanders can directly impact the success or failures of battles. The generals of the Second World War are a classic example of men who made quick and risky decisions, often coordinating the advance of troops through the chaos of gunfire and explosions. Charles de Gaulle is one of the most important names in French political life since Napoleon Bonaparte. He led the Free French government established in 1940, organizing and supporting the French resistance in the fight against the Axis powers soon after the German invasion. Born on November 22, 1890, in Lille, Charles was the third of 5 children. He began his military career in 1909 and achieved many positive highlights. At 1.96 meters tall, he was successful at the academy and achieved praise for his conduct, intelligence, and resistance to fatigue. In 1914, when World War I broke out, Charles de Gaulle took part in fierce fighting. His baptism of fire came on August 15th, when he was one of the first wounded at the Battle of Dinant, suffering a gunshot to the knee. That was not Charles's only injury in the war. In other conflicts, he was shot in the left hand and also wounded by a bayonet in the left thigh. He was captured by German soldiers during the famous Battle of Verdun, remaining a prisoner until the end of the First World War. With the outbreak of the Second World War, Charles was chosen to command the tanks of the French Fifth Army, delaying the advance of the German troops. He became a brigadier general on June 1, 1940. On June 9th, Charles flew to London, and for the first time, met British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. The relationship between Charles and Churchill was respectful and even friendly, even if the two almost always disagreed on plans to face the war. Charles played a very important role in radio broadcasts, where he urged the French people not to demoralize and to continue to resist the occupation of France. He and Churchill reached an agreement on August 7, 1940, where Britain would fund the Free French, with the bill being settled after the war. Charles organized the Free French forces, and the Allies supported and recognized his efforts. In his negotiations with the British and Americans, he insisted on maintaining complete freedom of action on behalf of France, saying that France should be treated as an independent power by the other Allied forces. After the war, he founded his own political party and was elected President of France. During his rule, he controlled inflation, stimulated industrial growth, and instituted a new currency in January 1960. Charles de Gaulle is regarded as one of the most influential leaders in the history of modern France. His ideology and political style still have a great influence on current French political life. Douglas MacArthur is undoubtedly one of the most iconic generals of World War II. With his rounded hat, aviator sunglasses, and a corncob pipe, his presence drew confidence and admiration from his soldiers. Raised in a military family, Douglas was born on January 26, 1880, in Little Rock, Arkansas. As a young boy, Douglas studied at a Texas military academy, where he was awarded the gold medal for his performance in studies and good behavior. During World War I, Douglas was sent to fight in France, where he served under General John Pershing. He was considered one of the greatest heroes of the U.S. Army Expeditionary Corps. In World War II, he again served in the military. He was selected as Chief of Operations in Southeast Asia, fighting Japanese expansion in the Pacific Ocean, where he commanded the American reaction. Douglas was promoted to general on December 20, 1941, and was put in charge of the U.S. Army forces in the Far East, with the mission of defending the Philippine Islands. A few months later, the famous attack on the Pearl Harbor naval base occurred, and the United States officially entered the war. Douglas MacArthur tried to slow the Japanese advance by mounting an initial defense against the Japanese landings. But soon after the enemy landing in Lingayen Gulf, he realized that he had relied excessively on the capability of his Philippine troops. He therefore ordered a withdrawal to Bataan province. With Japanese forces gaining more and more control over the Philippines during 1942, President Roosevelt ordered MacArthur to retreat to Australia. Upon landing in Australia, he gave his famous speech where he said, "I came through and I shall return." His promise was fulfilled 2 years later, where he commanded American troops in the reconquest of the Philippines. His performance gave him a unique place in World War II history, and he is considered one of the greatest military commanders of the 20th century, and one of the only 5-star generals in the US Army. The Imperial Japanese Army had in its ranks General Hideki Tojo, the country's head of government and leader for much of World War II. He led Japan's fight against the Allies during much of the Pacific War. Hideki was born in 1884 in Kojimachi, a district of Tokyo. He was the third son of Hidenori Tojo, a lieutenant general in the Imperial Japanese Army. Hideki had an education typical of Meiji-era Japanese youth, whose aim was to train boys to be soldiers as adults. This message was relentlessly spread to Japanese students. In March 1905, he was selected as an infantry second lieutenant, serving briefly in Siberia as part of the Japanese expeditionary force sent to the Russian Civil War. A stern and humorless man, Hideki was known for his brusque manners, his obsession with work, and strict behavior. On October 18, 1941, Hideki was chosen as Minister of the Army. He was a strong advocate of the tripartite alliance between Japan, Nazi Germany, and Fascist Italy. While Army Minister, he continued to expand the war with China. His popularity grew in the early years of World War II as Japanese forces won back-to-back victories. However, after the Japanese defeat at Midway, the tide of the war turned and became strikingly unfavorable to Japan. In 1945, after Japan's surrender, American General Douglas MacArthur, commander of the Allied forces in the Pacific, ordered the arrest of more than 40 Japanese military leaders on war crime charges, including Hideki. The former prime minister was found gravely wounded in his home after a suicide attempt, where Hideki shot himself in the abdomen and the bullet pierced his stomach. He survived thanks to medical intervention and was arrested and sentenced to hang on November 12, 1948. Regarded by many as the best general of World War II, Erich von Manstein was one of the most renowned commanders of the Wehrmacht, the armed forces of Nazi Germany. Manstein was born on November 24, 1887 in Berlin. He was the son of Edward von Lewinsky, a Prussian aristocrat and artillery general. Manstein attended the Imperial Lyceum, a Catholic gymnasium in Strasbourg. He was promoted to lieutenant in January 1907 and, in October 1913, entered the officer training program at the Prussian War Academy. During the First World War, Manstein served on Germany's western and eastern fronts. He was shot in the left shoulder and knee. A bullet struck his sciatic nerve, leaving his leg numb. In 1939, Manstein was appointed Chief of Staff to Gerd von Rundstedt, in charge of the Southern Army Group, which was planning the invasion of Poland. Rundstedt accepted the plans of Manstein, who advocated concentrating most of the armored units in the 10th Army. The aim was to quickly encircle the Polish forces west of the Vistula River. In Manstein's plan, 2 other armies would support the Southern Army Group towards Warsaw, the Polish capital. The German invasion was successful, defeating 9 Polish infantry divisions. The last military unit surrendered on October 6. The next step was to plan the invasion of France. Manstein, with the informal cooperation of Heinz Guderian, proposed that panzer divisions attack in the forests of the Ardennes, where no one was expecting them. In this way, the Wehrmacht would blockade the French and Allied armies in Belgium. Manstein's proposal also included a second operation to surround the Maginot Line. After the following years of the war, Manstein's strategies were crucial in major conflicts, such as Operation Barbarossa, which aimed to invade the Soviet Union, and the sieges of the cities of Leningrad and Stalingrad. After the end of the war in 1945, Manstein was arrested at the Palace of Justice, the site of the trials of the Nazi organizations and leading war criminals. Manstein was charged with 17 crimes at the trial, 3 of which related to events in Poland. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Eisenhower is undoubtedly one of the most influential names of this historical period. Born in 1890 in the state of Texas, Dwight David Eisenhower graduated from the military academy as a second lieutenant of infantry in 1915. During World War I, Eisenhower commanded troops in the embarkation on the Western Front, rising to major. Eisenhower entered World War II in 1942, a few months after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Also in 1942, Eisenhower took part in Operation Torch, whose purpose was to land Allied troops in North Africa to fight the German Expeditionary Force Afrika Korps. The operation was a success, and Eisenhower was appointed Commander-in-Chief of all land, air, and naval operations on the African continent. In 1943, President Roosevelt appointed Eisenhower as Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe. One of his first duties was to coordinate the naval landing at Normandy on the famous D-Day. With the end of the Second World War in 1945, Eisenhower fulfilled various roles in his military career. He became interested in a career in politics and ran for president in 1952, being elected President of the United States at the age of 62. With the end of the Second World War, many generals were honored as heroes for their brave deeds and effective strategies. But those who exceeded their authority committed war crimes and had to face trial, with their names forever being stained in history.